All right, good morning. As you can see from my little picture, this is probably not the most comfortable place for me to stand. I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to teach this class, but I've never taught in this kind of setting before. I've never created a PowerPoint or used one of these clickers. So, as John Wayne said it, courage is being scared to death but saddling up anyways. And with that, we'll get started. So our study today is coming from Acts 18, verses 1 through 11. We'll be studying the conversions that happened in Corinth. Acts 18:1 reads, "After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth." And anytime I'm reading in the Bible, when I read something like that, it almost always makes me want to know what the this was, what happened, what was this that happened before. So I made us just a small amount of a slide for us to figure out. The this is coming, from what I can tell, Acts 17, right around verses 16 to 27. While Paul was waiting for them, Silas and Timothy, at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. And that's Acts 17:16. So his response to that was to reason with the people of the city. Many of those people listened because they spent most of their time telling and hearing new things. I don't know that they necessarily thought what he was saying was genuine or believed him or trusted him, but they loved to go and hear what new thing was to be told. And lastly, he stood in the middle of the Areopagus, I guess that's how you say that. He lays out a 4-part sermon that reaches some, yet causes some to laugh at him. So that's just a short snippet of what the this is. So now he's departed, and the current setting for us is the bustling metropolis of Corinth. The city of Corinth is located in southern Greece, about 50 miles from Athens, about 2 miles south of the narrow isthmus that forms a land bridge between the main landmass of Greece and you're going to have to bear with me on this one, the Peloponnesus. The isthmus is less than 4 miles wide. Corinth controlled the 2 major harbors and thus command of the trade routes between Asia and Rome. In ancient days, small ships were dragged across the isthmus on a paved road. Larger ships unloaded their cargo, which was then carried across the isthmus and then reloaded on other ships. Sorry, y'all bear with me just a minute. I'm going to make myself a timer. One of the most important factors drawing Paul to Corinth was its strategic location on the narrow isthmus connecting central Greece to the southern landmass of the Peloponnesus. If that ain't right, somebody tell me. But I think that's right. Even more important than the land travel, north and south, however, was the sea travel, east and west, through the Saronic Gulf and the Gulf of Corinth, lapping the eastern and western shores of the isthmus, respectively. The Roman poet Horace wrote, in praise of twin-seed Corinth, sea captains plying the northern Mediterranean sea route between Europe and the Aegean Sea much preferred to bring their vessels through the sheltered waters of these 2 gulfs rather than add over 200 miles to their sea journey and risk more exposed seas off the southern coast of the Peloponnese. And Corinth stood, therefore, at a heavily traveled crossroads of the Roman Empire. Corinth was a commercial metropolis of Greece, situated on the Isthmus of Greece, about 50 miles west of Athens. It is one of the largest, richest, and most important cities of the Roman Empire, with a population of 400,000, surpassed only by Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. Through its harbors flowed the commerce of the world, a renowned and voluptuous city where the vices of East and West met. Here Paul stayed a year and a half on his second missionary journey, about AD 52 to 53, and founded one of the greatest churches right in the shadow of the Athenian philosophy. The diversity of this population of some 400,000 would have been unimaginable. People from every corner of the known world with backgrounds and cultures as different as that of a large-mouthed bass and an elephant. The opportunity presented to Paul here, as difficult as it was a great one. And he certainly rose to the occasion, or as John Wayne said, saddled up. Just on a quick note right there, I think about myself and how sometimes I can struggle in a situation or a scenario where it's not easy to share the gospel, where the folks that you're talking to probably don't want to hear what you have to say, or they might think you're foolish or crazy. And then you go and study a lesson like this and you're reminded of a guy, Paul, who was going into somewhere completely blind, without really anyone, no friends that we can see until he got there. And these people, some were probably accepted, but for the most part, the people that he was trying to teach, I mean, I'm nervous up here teaching y'all today, and I know all of y'all are on the same team as me, so I can't imagine how scary, how big a job that was for him. But he definitely showed his courage in going on and doing as he was supposed to do.
Just study what you're talking about now, as a matter of fact, how appropriate. But the population of 400,000 just counts the citizens. It really didn't incorporate the slaves and their families. So the population of this was almost double the 400,000.
So Chris is saying he just has been studying this too, and he was saying that the population of 400,000 doesn't include the slaves and their children. So more than likely the population was more like 800,000 than 400,000. So there was a lot of people here to possibly reach.
One other thing to remember, it's a port city. Whatever the population is, it's changing constantly.
All the time, yep. That's right. Yep. I read in a couple of my readings, I read about that, how the sea captains loved Corinth. They loved to come through Corinth. And from some of the stuff I read, loved to spend every bit of their money in Corinth too.
Which made for a very volatile and pleasurable,
Wild, free-for-all type situation. All right, here's another hard one for me. I need Connor in here so he can pronounce these for me. The dioklos, I guess is how we'll say it. So basically the meaning of this in Greek is just a cross and portage machine. So it was a paved trackway near Corinth in ancient Greece, which enabled boats to be moved overland across the Isthmus of Corinth. The shortcut allowed ancient vessels to avoid the long and dangerous circumnavigation of the Peloponnese, and the main function of it was to the transfer of goods. They say, although in times of war it became preferred means of speeding up naval campaigns, because the 3.7 mile to 5.3 mile long roadway was a rudimentary form of railway and operated from 600 BC until the middle of the 1st century, AD 4. So the dioklos combined the two principles of the railway and the overland transport of ships on a scale that remained unique in antiquity. So I thought that it was fitting to point out this dioklos and its influence on this whole culture in Corinth. it certainly had made a difference because of the fact that these sailors could literally pull up on one side of the isthmus, have their ship pulled up onto this is an actual real picture, so have their ship pulled up onto this paved road, and then the smaller ships, and by smaller, I'm not talking about a John boat, this is still a pretty big ship, but they would be hauled across that island fully loaded, and then right back to the water on the other side, and you cut 200 miles off your journey in some pretty treacherous seawater. And then the larger ships even came to port there, and what they would do, the larger ships that couldn't be pulled up onto the roadway and actually dragged across the island, there was usually a sister ship. So one would come into port on this side of the island with the goods. They would unload all of that stuff onto something similar to a railway cart or something like that. That would in turn be dragged across the island to the other side where the sister ship was waiting. And then they would load that cargo back onto that sister ship, and it would make the rest of the journey. And that was the runs that they would continually make. So you would have these guys coming in, passing through with their boats. You had the guys that came into port to unload. They would be in town mingling, going to the temple of Diana probably, and then the same with the other side. So this Diakolos definitely helped to add to the amount of people here in Corinth and to the diversity of the culture, because there were people coming from everywhere in that part of the world to make use of this pretty big engineering feat for their day. I got a little bit more on that. Because of Diakolos and its geographical location, the Isthmus of Corinth became a more multifaceted megaculture, unlike any other in the area of that day. Ancient Corinth became the richest center in Greece, generated a culture that promoted prosperity and pleasure, and hosted a plethora of religions that were as diverse as its own historical paganism and the new Christianity. Venus was the principal deity of Corinth, and her temple was one of the most magnificent buildings in the city. In it, 1,000 priestesses, public prostitutes, were kept at public expense, always ready for immoral indulgence as worship to their goddess. Rampant immorality was not something overlooked or tolerated. It was encouraged and made readily available for all society. The majority of the population was Greek, but a large number of Roman military veterans lived there as well, with a sprinkling of Phoenicians and Phrygians. The Roman character of this city is reflected by the many Latin names associated with it in the New Testament. Names like Aquila and Priscilla and Crispus and Lucius and Gaius. I'm skipping him, and Erastus, and I'm skipping him too, and Achaeus. You get the picture, you get the point. But may we not forget the Jews who were present, many of whom were displaced from Rome. Few were receptive, and most full out denied the teachings of Paul, which caused him some fear on this journey. Sorry, let me get there we go. All right, the man. Paul was on his second missionary journey at this point. He started on this journey around 51 AD, traveling from Antioch to Sicilia, Lycaonia, and then to Galatia. Around 52 AD, we see him moving from Troas to Philippi, then to Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, and to our place of study, Corinth, where he remained until sometime in the spring of 54 AD. The Apostle Paul, as great as he was not without his periods of despondency. When he penned 1 Corinthians, he informed the saints at Corinth that while he was with them, he experienced weakness, fear, and much trembling. And that's 1 Corinthians 2:3. This is consistent with Luke's narrative in the book of Acts. While Paul was at Corinth, the Lord spoke to his apostle in a night vision and admonished him, "Be not afraid, but speak and hold not your peace." That's Acts 18:9. In the Greek New Testament, the prohibition is literally, "Stop being afraid." The implication clearly is that Paul was struggling with within his spirit at the time, and the Savior came to his aid. I thought to myself when I was reading this, boy, that sure would be nice. You get that in the night vision. That's a pretty good night vision to get there. So, Paul was a highly devoted man. There's no question about that. He was a man, though. He was a brave man, a courageous man. There's no question about that either. But he was a man just like you and me, and even the bravest folks, even John Wayne sometimes gets a little bit scared. And the incredible thing about the God that we serve is that He's always near to us, and we can be comforted by Him even today. Yep. Acts 18:2-3. He found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. I think it goes without saying that Paul, at this point in his missionary journey, needed to support himself with work outside of the preaching of the gospel. These were the words of Paul in Acts 20:33-34. "I coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my necessities and to those who were with me." So we know that Paul did not have an issue in working to provide for himself or his cause. We know that he was willing and able to do just that. It was, from my research, some of the stuff that I've read, it was standard practice among Jews to have a learned trade and to teach this trade, often starting in youth. In this case, with Paul and tent making, it's likely from my perspective, but the Bible simply doesn't say that's exactly what happened. But from my perspective and my reading and studying on this lesson, most likely as a Jewish boy, he learned this trade of tent making then. Got all my notes I got to keep up. That's another thing that I have here in my notes that I wanted to mention to us was the fact, I guess in every lesson that I teach, in every Bible story that I read, I try to see the practical application for today if it's there. And so whenever I began to study this, I got to thinking about how in our lives, give me a show of hands. Who in this room works a public job? So I would say maybe half of us. But you go to work every day, and there is almost, I could say this and feel pretty comfortable with saying that there's quite a few people at the place that any given one of us is working that need to hear the gospel. It's interesting to me that Paul's work tied him to Priscilla and Aquila, and you see at some point they obeyed the gospel, and then they were beneficial. They aided in teaching folks the gospel themselves on down the road. And that's the way this thing works. And I know from my perspective, I've been a little convicted studying this because it's difficult to go to work. And those guys that they don't care a thing about God. Well, they may purport to believe in God or say that they're all right, they're going to heaven, but their actions blatantly display their disobedience to the God of heaven. And then you also, for me, another very difficult one is people who are religious, people who are firmly founded in their religion. A lot of times, you'll get more of a scolding out of them or more of a fight out of them if you try to teach them the truth than an atheist, simply because that's what they've been taught their whole lives, and there's so many other factors that play into that. Family and this person that's gone on and that person. All this to say our workplace is a field that's ripe for the picking for the Lord's kingdom. And if we have the courage enough, and I'm telling you, I'm preaching straight to myself right here, but if we have courage enough, there will be those folks, those Priscillas and Aquilas, that'll be converted, that want to hear the truth, that'll follow the truth, be obedient to it, and then they can take that you helped them to get and advance the kingdom themselves. And so the kingdom continues to multiply. I know it's not easy. It's definitely not. I work with some days I wonder if I ain't working at the detention center. I work some rough ones. But they're just as deserving of salvation as I am or as anybody else is. And sometimes we got to do like Mr. John Wayne and get in there and saddle up and at least give it a try. So I think this whole lesson has opened my eyes to maybe some of my being a little fearful, and I hope that I can change that for the better. All right. Let me see. There was a little snip off of this that I wanted to read to y'all. So this kind of gives us a little more info about the whole learning a trade from the Jewish rabbi, which I found very interesting and pertinent. So under those prevailing circumstances, Paul found a certain Jew named Aquila, and a man of Pontus, a province of Asia Minor by race, lately to come to Corinth with his wife Priscilla. And because Paul was of the same trade, that of tent making, he abode with them, and they wrought. Every Jewish boy was taught a trade. Rabbi Judah said, "He that teacheth not his son a trade teacheth him to be a thief." The Talmud read, "What is commanded of a father towards his son? To circumcise him, to teach the law, to teach him a trade." Through the trade learned in his youth, Paul formed the acquaintance of a man and his wife who were to be his companions and fellow workers in one way or another for the rest of his life. There is no indication that Aquila and Priscilla were at that time Christians, but later they expounded unto Apollos the way of God more accurately. Aquila and Priscilla had of late been driven out of Rome together with all of the Jews by Claudius the emperor. Claudius was emperor of Rome from AD 41 to 54, at which time Jews in the city of Rome, I skipped a line. At which time there were some 20,000 Jews in the city of Rome. Claudius had been quite friendly to the Jews, and he drove the Jews from the city of Rome, not from Italy, because of their tumultuous actions, and that not before they had been sufficiently warned. On one very interesting observation relative to Aquila and Priscilla is the fact that they traveled from place to place so freely, from Pontus to Rome, from Rome to Corinth, from Corinth to Ephesus, and from Ephesus to Rome again. A second interesting observation relative to them is the fact that in 3 out of 5 New Testament references, Priscilla is named before Aquila. This would indicate that Priscilla was the more energetic and better informed of the two. So that's a little more about Priscilla and Aquila. And I thought I had an ink pen in here. That'll work. All right, moving on. Acts 18, verses 4 through 6. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade the Jews and the Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that the Christ was Jesus. And when they opposed him and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I'm innocent. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." Sorry, I made notes that correspond with my slides, and I done forgot which slide I'm on. All right, call it back up. Okay, the Jews. Not so far from the normal with the Jews. We've been kind of seeing a lot of this in our class on Wednesday night, talking about these Pharisees and scribes. They have been presented with the truth, and they again reject it. Paul, at this point, to me, seems to be fed up with their reviling him over the testifying to them that Jesus is the Christ. He makes it known to them by professing his innocence and reminding them that their blood is on their own heads. It's interesting to me here, if we look to verse 4, Paul was reasoning or teaching folks every Sabbath day in the synagogue. Yet these were not only Jews, they're also Greeks. Here's what gets my attention the most about it, is it was the Jews who did the reviling, the so-called religious folks. And upon his departure, he made it known that he had done all he could do for that specific group of Jews. They just would not be taught. And again, in some of my studies, many of my Bible studies personally, I find it almost always more difficult to teach people who have preconceived notions from religious indoctrination than someone who does not believe that there's a God. They're both very difficult to teach, both people are. But in my personal experience, someone who has a preconceived notion, it's very difficult to change their mind. Tim, do you remember right off the top of your head that verse you and Chad and I were talking about in the foyer Wednesday, and you said the scribes or the Pharisees, one, that everything that they did was for someone to see them doing it?
They did to be seen of me.
That's right. Okay.
Because that's the verbiage.
Basically for these guys, and that's one difference that I would like to note, is basically for these guys, their intention was kind of bad from the start. They never really started out with good intent. A lot of my religious friends, they do think that they're right, and they're genuinely doing the best that they can in what they believe is the correct thing. So the intent of the heart of the man is different. You got it?
Yeah, Matthew 23:5. But all their works they do for to be seen of me, to make their broad their phylactery.
Right.
So that's all that they did.
Yeah.
All is all.
All is all. So that basically tells us the intent of the heart of these Jewish folks who so often are balking against the apostles' teaching. Yeah.
Paul recognized that, and he did what he was instructed to do, which is to try to teach these people. And if they're not willing, and if they take up all this time and they revile him, he knows that other people will receive that, so he's shaking off the dust and going there.
Right.
That's exactly what he's doing.
Right. Chris just says that Paul's doing exactly what he was told to do, excuse me, in this situation, as he was told to teach these folks, and he did that. And they didn't accept it, and he was also told, there's other people to be taught as well. Shake the dust off your feet and go to the next place. The choice. That's a good segue, Chris. Thanks. To press on, to shake the dust, to keep the faith, to quit. These are questions that would have been heavy on my mind. It's difficult to get up here in front of you guys and teach. It really is. It would be infinite amounts difficult if I was in front of you to teach and I was debating every one of you unanimously, which is often what I feel like Paul had to face. Just people constantly questioning what he was teaching. And Paul's heart, opposite the Jews, was a sincere heart that really was concerned for their souls. I think sometimes in our current demographic, if we're not careful, we'll be guilty of just wanting to teach somebody what is right, what we know is right, because they're wrong. But I don't think that was what Paul ever set out to do. What Paul set out to do was win souls. And there's a difference. There's certainly a difference. So it would have been, man, I can't imagine. I would have been wanting to quit. I know I would have. Mike?
Not to mention they were trying to beat him to death oftentimes.
Often.
So not only is he debating people that are teaching people who didn't believe, they would also try to kill him.
Yes.
So that was another layer of.
And he's alone. It's seemingly always a group versus Paul. He's not. We know he has the God of heaven with him, so he's not alone. But as far as people go, at this point in time, at this moment, it's him. So, a great city full of so many people, so many ideas that differed from mine. This is me thinking what I would do here. Immorality is championed. The so-called godly folks have rejected the very salvation that they've been looking for years and years and years. I'd be fearful not only of the rejection and their failure to accept the truth, but also the very real possibility that my life could be taken for the cause here. There's definitely the chance of that is at hand. Yet Paul considered the Gentiles, those who were in second place, to the Jews, and after seeing that there was no way that those in first place, or those that had the first place, I don't want that to sound incorrectly, but the ones that he was sent to first, they wouldn't accept the truth. He made it his mission to reach those who would be reached. So he didn't get so mad or so scared because of what was going on around him and the rejection and the failure that took place with the Jews that he just up and quit like I would really want to do if it was me. I know I would. I'm just being candid and honest with you guys. It'd be really difficult to keep pressing on. Yeah, he was a pretty special guy. But it would have been. It would have been very easily, man, just to say, this is too much, Lord. I'm not ready. I can't do it. But I think about him being in that synagogue and looking around and seeing people who were listening. Maybe Greek folks. Maybe there was that one Jew. I think there was. We'll see that here in a minute. But, although this mountain seems enormous to climb, it'll be worth it for those few folks. And I'm called to do this. This is what I need to be doing. This is what I'm supposed to do. So Acts 18:7, and he left there and went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. I just wanted to give Titus Justus a quick little old slide. In Acts 18, we have a glimpse of a man named Titus Justus. In this glimpse, we're given the equivalent of his epitaph. Verse 7 tells us that Paul left there, the synagogue, and went to the house of Titus Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next to the synagogue. I'm not sure that I would want to welcome into my home a man who has managed to seriously offend a significant group of people who regularly frequent the property next door. However, Titus Justus welcomed Paul into his home, and from this beginning, we see that God promises Paul that he has many people in the city, and he begins a lengthy period of 18 months of ministry there. Titus Justus lived as a worshiper of God. This is what marked him out. This is the fact worth reporting. This is what enabled him to have a right focus and extended long-term hospitality in dangerous circumstances to an unpopular man for the sake of the gospel. This is what enabled him to live righteously in a godless city, Corinth, where immorality and sinfulness abounded. This is his epitaph, and what a good one. One thing that I read that was interesting to me, just concerning like the culture at that time, whenever they took someone in, it wasn't their custom. If that person was to stay in that area, their custom for the day would be, if you take him into your house, he stays there until he leaves that area, unless you have the falling out where the shake the dust off your feet and go to the next house comes from. So it says a lot about Titus Justus, because this wasn't just an overnight thing or this week thing. The best that I can tell, and I don't know this with certainty, but the best that I can tell from the way their culture worked, he probably stayed the whole time he was in Corinth. Paul stayed with Titus Justus in his house. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord together with his entire household, and many other Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his house. In Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians, he states that he personally baptized Crispus. The baptism of Crispus at his house was bound to have had tremendous influence upon the Jewish community, both then and also later. Consider a couple of things. What about verse 6? Never going to they're leaving the Jews, right? So, how is it that the first convert is the ruler of the synagogue? Is he not a Jew? The answer is yes. He was a Jew. He heard the truth and received it with gladness in his heart. I'm in awe of the providence portrayed here. Paul comes to the Jews and preaches to them in the synagogue. He's rejected and basically tossed out. He then says, that's it. I'm applying the Matthew 10:14 rule here, and I'm out. I'll go to the Gentiles. Yet the very first convert runs the synagogue. He would set up the holy days. He was the man. He was in charge. I can only imagine the affirmation in Paul's mind of what the Lord is about to tell him in verses 9 through 11. So the fact that this conversion happened totally affirms what the Lord's fixing to tell him. May we never forget that although much is required of us, we will never be required to do it alone. We can always know that God is operating through His providence, and all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. So many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed, were baptized, and the Corinthians were the pagan Greeks. They had no connection with the synagogue. Paul's two epistles to the church of Corinth indicated that the congregation was predominantly made up of Gentiles. Even though the conversion of Crispus is still interesting to note, that most of the people who made up the congregation of Corinth were previously godless or at very best idol worshippers. Question: which looks better through the lens of today's study? To be so set and so sure you're right in your religion that you refuse to change, even if what you believe is false, like our Jews, or to be deeply involved in sin and idolatry, carried away in acts that will be repulsive to the so-called religious folks, yet your heart be tender enough to be taught the truth and be willing to obey it, thus saving your soul. What about Matthew 23:13? What Paul dealt with here with the Jews, we're dealing with today with our denominational friends and family. To be frank, some of them will not accept the truth no matter how true it is. Yet, there are those who appear to have no interest in God, and they obey. Even still, among those steeped in their traditions, you're bound to find a Crispus. As a matter of fact, you're looking at one even now as we speak. The point is this: the fear is not in failing to convert a person. The fear is in failing to try. Jesus died for the Jews, the alien sinners, the atheists, the agnostics, the hypocrites, and the denominational folks too. What he said in his death was what all of them are worthy of, trying to help them go to heaven. 2 Corinthians 5, all of them are worthy. What he said in his death was that all of them are worthy of our help to get to heaven. 2 Corinthians 5:14 and 15 says it like this: for the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all. Therefore all have died, and he died for all. And that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. I'm just going to breeze over this one quickly. So there is some confusion. I've heard this in some of my denominational studies. You see, Paul didn't come to baptize. Paul wasn't sent to baptize people. But that's not the idea. The context, the real idea here is it's not who baptizes you. So there are those who would like to argue that, well, you shouldn't be baptizing folks on account of they might start to follow this person or that person. Or they might say that the preacher needs to baptize you or whatever. But it doesn't matter who baptizes you, as long as you're baptized scripturally and you've been obedient to the gospel, then you're doing good. I guess that's it. Is that the last one? All right. We made it through the conversions. In the end, we see the Lord being there for Paul, caring for him, and encouraging him to go on. Well, let's just go there. In conclusion, when Paul came to Corinth from Greece and he encountered opposition, persecution did not neuter the success of the gospel. For instance, Crispus believed and was immersed, and so was Gaius. In fact, many of the Corinthians hearing believed were immersed. Though not stated here, it is clear that these saints understood the nature and necessity of repentance. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 and 10 says, know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. And such were some of you, but you are washed and you are sanctified. Courage and sound teaching coupled with perseverance, despite circumstances, produces lasting results. It's my prayer that we, like Paul, will go into the field that is ripe for harvest and short on laborers, and do what is expected, yea, commanded of us. Forgetting the fact that we could fail and why we build our tents. It's not an option, it's a duty. Thank you so much for your time.